So I have about $140,000 of debt, somewhere between 140 and 150. We've been on a payment pause here in the States, so I haven't had to deal with payments for quite a while, as a function of COVID. One of the ways that and most of that debt is grad school. So, like I said, Cornell heavily funded me. I think now Cornell is edging on $60,000 a year. When I went, it was in the low 50s. So, you're talking about a 5-year program at 50 or 60. You're talking about the cost of a very high end sports car, certainly a house. But when I graduated from Cornell, I was funded up to 10K a year. I was funded with only 10K a year left over, which is what I had to take out in loans. So I left Cornell with about a little bit less of $50,000 in debt. And then grad school, which is a hefty commitment. That's I went to a 2-year program, and I got grants to do that as well, but nowhere near enough to cover it. Essentially, one of the reasons I ended up getting an MBA, which I did for free online, was to understand how financial engineering works and to understand how to pay back my loans. At the time, I was dating someone in finance and was trying to figure out how I would actually pay back my student loans when I graduated. When I graduated from grad school, my first job was making about 50K a year. I had about 150 in loans, and I was like, all right, I live in Manhattan, or in order to work where I was going to work, I needed to live in Manhattan. Rent costs whatever it cost at the time. I think I was paying $1,700 a month when I graduated. And it was just like, all right, you have this much coming in after taxes. So how do I do this? And I learned about discounted cash flow analysis, and I figured out, the value of my loans in the future was going to be XYZ. I'm on an income-based repayment plan. So the amount of money I have to pay towards my student loans is directly based on the income that I make, on my tax return. And then at the end of 20 years of paying that, which I'm now just about 10 years into, that balance will be forgiven, but the amount that's forgiven is taxable. Essentially, it gets tacked onto your income. So I knew that in 20 years, I would have what we kind of call if you nerd out over this sort of thing, the tax bomb investment. At the time, I think I calculated that the amount I was going to be forgiven was going to add about $75,000 of income onto my income that year, which means it would bump me into a tax bracket. I would need to pay that amount of money. And the present value of that amount, so 20 years prior, was about $23,000. And while paying back $150,000 seemed impossible, I figured out that 23, while still a ton of money, was suddenly doable. And I did everything I possibly could to save and freelance and earn money on the side to make sure that I had $23,000 as soon as possible. It took about probably 18 months, maybe 2 years, to kind of put that aside and put it in an investment account that will grow to, 20 years from then being enough to cover that tax bomb investment. And then essentially everything I pay towards my student loans is tied to my income. The more I make, the more I pay when we're in repayment. And if I make nothing, I would pay nothing, but making nothing terrifies me. So I basically got into finances and financial engineering, and I learned that money is a tool, not something to be afraid of. I grew up being afraid of it.